Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. And before we actually get into the video, I already recorded the video. I just wanted to go over really quick what exactly are we going to build. So first of all, I wanted to go over the technologies we're going to be using so that you guys are aware of what I'm going to be teaching in this small series. Basically, I'm just going to go over ReactJS, NodeJS and Express for the backend. Then I'm going to obviously build a REST API, so I'm going to be talking about all the different aspects of a REST API. And finally, for the database, I'm going to be using MySQL as the database and Sequelize.js as the ARM to manage and make queries in our database. So those are the technologies that you will learn if you continue watching the series. So that's why I wanted to present it before we actually get and do anything. And the next thing I wanted to show was basically kind of a mock-up of what we're going to be building. I know it looks horrible right now, but this is kind of just the idea. We're going to be building a website where you can like insert and write posts, and each post has like a title, the user who created this post, their username appear over here, and then some sort of text like a tweet or something just to like represent whatever you want to write on that post. And on the web page, on the main web page, there's going to be a list of like all the posts that people have done, and we're going to be able to create new posts. We're also going to be able to write comments on other people's posts, and maybe later on in the future we're going to be able to like posts and do all that kind of stuff. So this is the basic idea of what we're going to be building. Let's get into the video. Hello everyone, welcome to the first video of this new series that I'm going to bring here to the channel, which I will basically build a full stack application, so the front end and the back end, using the most desired technologies in my view, which are React, Node.js, Express, and for the database I will be using MySQL. So this series will actually be useful for people who aren't using MySQL. However, I had to choose a database, and I think that the logic behind MySQL is pretty simple to convert it to any other databases that you're using, and I believe that even if you're using another type of database, it will be completely applicable and you will be able to learn a lot from this series. So what we're actually going to be building in this series is just a whole full stack application, which will consist of a React frontend, including a place where you can write like comments, write posts, choose your username, that kind of stuff, and then write posts to the website. And then most importantly, you can also navigate through different posts that people have made and click on them and even reply to them. So we're going to be incorporating kind of a comment section that is usable in many different websites into this project, just to go over many of the core concepts that you need to understand if you're going to build a full stack application. If you're interested in seeing the final version, I'm going to leave a link to the playlist, which if you're watching this in the future after I already finished this tutorial series, you can just go on to the last episode and just see how it all looks. However, it's going to be a very simple front end containing all the required core components that we need to actually make our application work. And if you want to check out the code will be in the description. I'm going to leave a link to my GitHub repository, which is going to be divided into branches which are compared to episodes. So basically, if you want to check the code for the first episode, just go to the branch of episode 1. And if you want to check the code for the whole project, just go to the last, which is going to be for the last episode. So now, before we actually get into the tutorial, if you guys could leave a like, I would massively appreciate it, because it will help the channel grow. It will make YouTube push my videos to more people, and I would really appreciate if you guys could give me this support, because I'm putting a lot of effort into the channel, and I would be really grateful if you guys did so. So now, let's actually start by building our application. So as you can see right here, I have an empty project opened up in VS Code. If you're not using VS Code, that's completely fine. However, I'm going to be using it because I just think it's the best code editor out there, and it's probably the most popular one as well. So the first thing we have to do is we have to divide our folder into two different folders. So the first one is going to be the client side. So I can just come over here and write client. And the second folder is going to be the API, or the server. And you can call them whatever you want, but I feel like client and server makes more sense, or you can even call it front end and back end. We're just dividing our files so that we have a clear distinction between what we're writing for our API and what we're writing for our React front end, right? And all we have to do is we have to initialize our project files inside of both of them. And in this tutorial series, we're going to start by building the API first. We're obviously going to keep like exchanging between the front end and the back end. However, just as the starter tutorial, we're only going to be focusing on the API at the beginning. So in order to make our API, we have to open up our terminal here on VS Code. I'm going to clear here my terminal, and you can see that currently I'm inside of the folder, this whole folder where our project is in, right? However, if I want to make any changes to my server folder, all I have to do is I need to write the command change directory, so cd, and then write the name of the folder, so server. And now you can see I'm inside of the server folder. And why I need that is because I need to do this in order to initialize my API, right? My Node.js and Express API. So we're going to be using npm as the package manager in this. If you're using Yarn, it's almost the same thing. However, to initialize your server, all you have to do is just write npm init. And you'll see that now a bunch of questions will start appearing. I'm just going to press enter on my keyboard until it finishes. And you can do the same thing. And as you can see, it asks, is this okay? And we just pressed enter one more time, and a package.json file appears here in our screen. So the package.json file is just a JSON file containing information about your project and all the packages that you have installed. So I wouldn't worry that much about this. I would just actually ignore it for now, but just know that this will be kind of like dictating the configuration of your project, right? And also when you install a package or a library, the name of the library and the version will appear over here. But you shouldn't worry at all about this. Just know that this is an important file. Now we have to start installing our packages that we're going to be using in our backend. So the first dependency, or the first library or package that we're going to be using is the Express library. So to install Express, I'll just come over here and say npm install Express. And Express is the framework we're going to be using to create our REST API. It really helps us do it very easily, and it's just a great combination for whenever you want to make a REST API in Node.js. So we're going to install Express, and then we also want to install some other stuff. I'm going to go over what they mean later. However, we need to install a package called course, which will allow us to make a connection between our front end in React and our server. If we don't install it, we're going to get errors. And then we also want to install the package we're going to be using for our database. So here's the part where if you're using MongoDB or any other database, you can just install whatever, like configure it on your own. However, for those who want to use MySQL, I'm going to install a package called MySQL 2, which is a package that exists in the NPM world, and it's great because it allows you to connect to a MySQL database very easily, and at the same time, it provides us with some good syntax related to the newest versions of JavaScript. So that might not be really clear for beginners. However, just know that it is a great package, and it will allow us to serve MySQL into our project. Now that we have installed those packages, you'll see that they appear now in our package.json, and some other folders and files appeared. You should just ignore those. The node modules and the package log.json, you can just ignore those. They are not useful for us to touch on. So we see that our libraries appear over here. We installed course, Express, and MySQL 2. So this is what I mentioned before, that they would appear in the package.json. So now that we have this done, we can actually start by creating our initial entry point for our API. So I'm going to click a new file over here inside of the server folder, and I'm going to call this file index.js. So you can see that currently this is it's actually outside of the server, so I'll just put it inside. So it has to be inside of the server folder. But most importantly, the reason why I called it index.js is because over here we say that we want our API to have our main entry point on the file called index.js. If you want to call it something else, want to call it app.js, server.js, whatever you want, you have to change the name over here and change the name on the package.json as well. However, we're not going to be doing this. We're just going to call it index.js for simplicity reasons. And over here, we can start by building our Node.js and Express server. So to do that, it's pretty simple. We can just come over here and create a variable called Express, which is going to be an instance of the Express framework. So we can just say const express equals to require express. And then we need to create a variable called app, which is equal to express like this. And this is how you initialize this variable over here, which will allow us to make API requests, initialize our server, do a lot of stuff. So this is kind of the only two lines of codes that will be kind of standard whenever you start an API. You just call Express from the library. You just create a variable called Express, which is an instance of the framework Express, and then you create a variable called app, which is equal to an instance of Express. So that's the idea. And now if you want to start your API, you can say that you want app.listen, and then over here you have to pass some sort of port. So we need to, in our computer, we have our local host and it runs on different ports, and we can run servers inside of it. So in this case, we can determine a number, a 4-digit number, that is going to represent what port we're going to run our server in. So I like to actually run on port 3001, and you can choose whichever one you want. Just know that we need to make this port different from the port when we initialize our React application. So that's why I like to call it 3001. And then when you say app.listen, you can also pass a function over here, an anonymous function that is going to run whenever the server starts. So why do I want to do this? Just to get a confirmation that our server is running. So I can just put console.log over here and say, like, write a message saying something like server running on port 3001, something like that, right? And now when we run this application, it should listen to a server on a port 3001 and then console log this message. We can test to see if this is working by basically opening this up over here and just running the command node index.js. So we ran the command node and then the name of the file where our server is running. When we press enter, you'll see that it will say server running on port 3001. And if we go to our Google Chrome and we try to go to localhost 3001, it gives us this message over here, which is completely fine. It means it's working, and I'll go over why it says cannot get slash, but this is basically meaning that it's working. Now that we have this done, I actually want to install another package called Nodemon. And the reason why I want to install this package is because if you take a look for a second, you can see that to run our application, we have to run the command node index.js, and the server is running, right? However, if we make any changes over here, it won't be like the changes won't appear on the server. You would have to close the connection by pressing Ctrl+C and then running node index.js again, and that's just a lot of work. There's much simpler ways of doing this, and the simplest way of doing this is basically installing a package called Nodemon, like this. And when you install it, it's basically going to restart the server every time you save your file, which means that you don't have to run the command again just to show your changes. It will automatically show the changes you made to the server. And after install Nodemon, to actually make it work, all you have to do is you need to come over here into this scripts tag. And if you don't have this scripts tag, you just create one exactly like this. And you come over here and you just pass the command start and then say Nodemon index.js, which basically allows you to, whenever you run the command npm start, it should run the command nodemon index.js, which means it's working. So let's save this package.json, and now let's run npm start. And you'll see that it should say server running on port 3001. But if I make any changes over here and I save it, you'll see that it restarted, but it crashed because I just wrote random letters. But if I save it again, you'll see it will automatically restart our server, which means we don't have to keep writing the command every time we make any changes. So now that we have that completed, let's start by connecting our database to our project. So to do so, I'm gonna first create my database, and again, if you're using a different type of database, it's totally fine. You have to create the database somewhere. In my case, I'm using a program called Mysql Workbench, which is a program I love, and I'm gonna open it up over here. I'm gonna leave a link for the download in the description, and you also need to make sure that you have MySQL installed in your computer, just so that you can create the database, right? And when you download Mysql Workbench, you can just click on the program and it will open up like this. And all I have to do in this case is I just have to create a new database over here. And to create a database, you go to the schemas tab here on the left and you just click on create schema. And then you can just come here and give it a name. Let's call this tutorial DB. Obviously you shouldn't call it like this. I'm just going to call it tutorial DB just because it's a database I'm using for a tutorial. But in order to actually create the database, you click apply over here and it should generate some SQL, and you can just click on apply again and it actually creates the database somewhere here on the left. You'll see that we have tutorial DB over here, right? But obviously it doesn't have any tables yet, and it won't have any tables, at least for now, because we're not going to create our tables over here. We're going to do it through code. I'm going to show you guys what that means. I know that configuring a database is annoying, so if you want to pause the video, download the Mysql Workbench, install MySQL into your computer, or just configure it using MongoDB, you can do so. But then come back, because we're going to be working with more specific stuff, like how to connect to our Express server with our React app, and how to actually create those functionalities that allows you to comment on posts and add stuff to your front end. But now I want to explain to you guys how to create those tables, and how we're going to do that is actually we're going to be using a package, something called an ORM, which allows us to write SQL very easily. And the ORM we're going to be using is called Sequelize. So for those who don't know, it is probably one of the most famous MySQL, or actually it doesn't even need to be MySQL, one of the most famous SQL ORMs out there, and it is called Sequelize. So to install this ORM, we can just write npm install, and we can pass two packages. The first one is Sequelize, and the second one is Sequelize CLI, basically like this. And we need to install both of those packages. And now that we have installed both of those packages, we can just go into the server folder in our terminal and run the command Sequelize init like this. And you should see that a bunch of folders should appear on the left, and that's totally fine. We actually only need two of them, so let's delete the migrations folder and the seeders folder. You don't need to know what that means. Let's move them to the trash. And this will now help us, because Sequelize will make our code look a lot better. If we're writing queries or just inserting stuff into our database, it is kind of ugly when you write on pure SQL inside of your code. So by using an ORM, it just makes everything easier to look at and also more secure. So Sequelize, I have a tutorial on it if you want to check that out. But I'm also going to go over in this tutorial series how it works, and I'm going to show you guys how to actually implement it. So now that we have installed it, all we have to do is we have to actually start by creating our table. So in this case, let's think about our project. We're gonna have posts, right? Which you can comment on. You can write some text. You can also provide your username. We can also have some functionality allowing you to like a post, something like that, right? So what do we need to write in our code so that our table satisfies those conditions? So to do so, we actually need to start by creating our table. And to create a table, you just come here to the models folder and just create a file with the name that you want to use to represent that table. So in this application, we're just gonna have like posts. So let's just call it posts.js. So that's the name of our table, but if you want to create a table for users, you can call it users.js, right? And Sequelize will get this name over here and will automatically put it as the name of your table. And now we need to write the code that is going to create our table. And to do so, we're going to start by using by creating a function, an anonymous function that is going to create that model and exporting it from this file so that we have access to it in other files. So if you want to export some sort of variable from a file in Node.js so that you access it in different files, you can do so by writing module.exports and equating it to whatever you want to export. And it can be a variable, it can be an object, and it can be a function, which is what we're going to export over here. So we're going to export this function over here, and inside of this function, it should take two arguments. The first one is Sequelize, and the second one is data types, like this. And you shouldn't worry, this is already handled by Sequelize. Basically, this is what we're going to be using to access types in Sequelize. So inside of here, we have to create a variable to represent our model, and let's call it posts. And set it equal to Sequelize.define, like this. And we're going to define the table as posts. And then over here, we can just write all the structure for our table. And at the end, we just have to return this object that we created called posts. And this is basically the logic for it. And inside of here, we need to define each field or column that we want to have in our table. So let's think about this. What do we want to have in our posts table? Well, we might want to have a title, right? Because every post in our web page will have a title. Then we want to have some sort of like the actual post, like the post text or the post description, something like that. And finally, I just want to save also the user's username, whoever is writing the post, so that we can get some recognition, right? So how do we actually define all of those, like those 3 columns in Sequelize? So to do so, you can just come over here and write the first one, which is title, and you just set it equal to an object. And this object has to define some stuff. For example, it must have a type like this. And let's think about it. It's a title, right? So what is the type of a title? Well, a title usually is a string, right? The title for a post is just a sentence or a word. So we can use the data types variable that we have over here and just say data types dot string like this. And this is how you define types in Sequelize. And then down here, we can add some more properties. For example, whenever we want to add a post, we don't want to allow our database or our table to insert posts that doesn't have a title, right? So we can say that this column does not allow null. So we can say allow null is equal to false. And for now, I think that those are the 2 properties that we might want to have. So let's actually just copy this and do the same for the 2 other columns that we want to have in our table. So the second one is the actual description for the post. So let me actually call it post text. It's just the text for our post, right? Whenever you're on Twitter, this is kind of what you're tweeting. This is what I mean, right? And it's also going to be a string, and it's also not going to allow it to be empty, right? And then finally, we want the username, which is again going to be a string, and you have to put a username in order to enter, like in order to insert some sort of post, right? And this is basically it. This over here should generate the table in MySQL. So if you never actually generated tables with an ARM before, you might be used to just creating the table individually by writing some sort of SQL statement or using Mysql Workbench directly. With an ARM, you just define the columns and tables like this, and it creates automatically for you. So for example, if we came here and we deleted this posts.js, which is automatically already being handled by Sequelize, which by the way, you see that this index.js file was already here. Don't worry, don't touch this at all. This already comes and it's totally fine. You don't have to do anything with it. It will automatically get every single file that you create over here and identify them as a different table. So we just created this table. How do we actually make it so that it will appear in our database? Because you can see if I refresh this thing over here, no tables appear over here. So to do so, all we have to do is we need to import this this model, right? We need to import this table by simply coming over here and saying const db is equal to require, and we require the models folder, and it will, this variable over here will automatically go over every single table, every single model that we created. And if we use this over here before the app.listen, it will basically just create everything for you. So we can say db.Sequelize like this, and then say .sync like this, and then say .then, because it's going to be a promise, and we can just generate our app.listen inside of here. I know this might seem a bit confusing, especially if you're a beginner, but just think about it this way. This is the entry point of our API. This is when we run our API. Whenever we want to start our API or our server, this is where it's going to start. And all we're doing is we're saying that when we start our API, we want to at the same time go over every single table that exists on the models folder, check to see if they exist in our database, and if they don't, create that table. That's all they're doing, and it will create automatically the table for you over here. However, you still might be wondering, well, we haven't connected our Sequelize, we haven't connected Sequelize to this database. How does it know that the database we're going to be using for this project is TutorialDB? Well, to do that, it's very simple. All you have to do is you have to come here to the config folder, and you'll see a config.json. And when you click on this, you'll see that it will ask a bunch of questions. For example, right now we're only going to focus on the development tag, but all we have to do is we need to first choose our dialect, and the dialect is just the whatever database system you're using. We're using MySQL, so we just leave it as MySQL, and then we put the username, the password, and the database name for our connection. And if you don't know what those means, is basically usually for most people, it's going to be the same. If you're serving your database in your computer, which is what we're using and what most people do, you can just leave username as root. The password, you can either leave it as null, or you can leave it as an empty string like this, or for my case, I leave it as password like this. And if one is not working for you, just test all three. I think one of them will work, hopefully. Then for the host, you can either leave it like this or just give it a local host like this, and that serves as part of the connection. And finally, you need to give the database name. So I'm just going to put the name that we gave over here in our MySQL Workbench, which is TutorialDB, and I can just put it like this, TutorialDB, and it knows that this is the database we're talking about. And now if we save this, it should know that the connection should be like, it should know that that's the database we're talking about. And now that we have this done, all we have to do is we just have to run our server by running npm start like this, and Nodemon should appear a message over here, create table if not exists, posts. Basically this is the SQL it's running, and it runs automatically when we save this. So if you got any errors in between this, if you got any error messages, leave a comment down below. I can definitely help you out. But also make sure that in your package.json you have installed all the required dependencies. You have installed all these packages over here, because or else it won't work. So now that we have this installed over here, we can go to our MySQL Workbench, and you saw that before we had 0 tables in our TutorialDB database, right? But if I refresh this right now, you'll see that now we have 1 table called posts. And if we select rows limit 1,000, we can see that our table looks like this. It contains an ID, a title, a post text, a username, and then a created ad and an updated ad. So the ID and those two over here, they are created automatically. We don't have to worry about them at all. But all we have to worry about is the title, post text, and username, which are the ones we're going to be using for our project. Since this video is getting a little bit long right now, I'm going to leave it right here. Go check out the next episode, because we're going to be using this database to actually start implementing our API. That's basically it. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. I answer every single question. If you have any suggestions for the series, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you want to see. I'm really excited for this series, because I'm planning on doing a lot of stuff with it. So if you guys enjoyed it, please leave a like down below. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I see you guys next time.